So imagine for a second that you have a question that you need to have answered and you want to review the clinical literature. This is not a question like which quarterback won the most Super Bowls or how many fans can be seated in this arena. Questions that, you would see in my search history. No, like these are serious questions about what's the best way to treat somebody, what's the published literature say, how do we know the published literature is legitimate, how do we do this in a systematic way that's legitimate and credible. And so I think we all run into this in the med device world. And I'm as guilty as anybody. I'm going to send over studies about my product that say my product is great. Or that, right, like, and I try not to cherry pick, and I try to be very honest, but it's not easy. And so clinicians and researchers have come up with ways to do this, but it's a heavy lift. So I came across these guys at Nested Knowledge through a friend, and I've talked to them. They're really interesting. Now, we're only going to have one of the brothers that started this company, the Kallmes brothers, but Kevin's going to be on. But they're designed to help all sorts of companies, researchers, and entrepreneurs do legitimate clinical research to say, hey, is a robotic total knee better for patients than manual? And goodness knows we hear people arguing about it. Or what's the best way to do a cardiac stent in a certain patient population that's been published and that's legitimate? How do you come up with that? Well, these guys have created something that theoretically should do that and make it easy and objective, meaning like there's as little bias as possible. And it's used as a long time methodology, systematic review, and turbocharges it. And I kind of think there's going to be some interest in this, but I don't know enough. So I'm going to talk to Kevin Kallmes of Nested Knowledge. I'm actually even going to let him show his product, which I rarely do on this, because I think for us to understand it, I think we need to see it. But I'm gonna make him work hard too. I'm Mark Copeland. I'm the Value Analysis Whisperer. This is my most recent episode of How I'm Building This on Sutures and Cents, where we interview startup companies that are doing things differently in the med device space and in a way that helps patient care. And I think these guys qualify. Why don't you decide when we talk to Kevin Kallmes of Nested Knowledge? You and I are neighbors. I work in the construction industry. I swing a hammer every day. But we're in the driveway and we're taking the garbage down or whatever. And I'm like, hey, Kevin, somebody told me you guys started another company. It's Nested Knowledge, I heard. I saw it on your shirt, the other day. Kevin, what the hell is Nested Knowledge? What would you tell me if we had that conversation?
Yeah, great question. And as you know, I've previously founded companies and I worked in the device industry, and research is really important to understanding whether a device is safe or whether it works for patients or what patients it works for. And as a device company executive and previously as a medical researcher, I had this same problem come up over and over again. I would go to the medical literature to try to figure out whether a device was safe or effective for a certain population, and I would just have to sit there reading a bunch of PDFs. And so Nested Knowledge is really meant to solve that problem of I need to get information out of the literature, but it's a huge pain, and it's a huge, really it's an ocean of literature that we need to go through, and I didn't have a lot of good tools to do so. So Nested Knowledge is a tool for accessing, interpreting, and analyzing that medical literature.
Okay, so I don't know if the other people that listen to this, founders I've interviewed, I don't know if they noticed what Kevin just did. Kevin did something very important. Kevin made it sound understandable, realistic. And by the way, Kevin also started with the problem first, not the product. So well done. By the way, I didn't prompt you. You went right into it, and it was great. So yeah, so basically you're telling me if I struggle with wading through reams of literature and trying to make heads or tails of it, you guys help with that. You're the
Exactly.
See, I like that. Okay, that makes sense. I don't know if my construction guy, mallet swinging dude, would get it, but I think he would. So I like that. All right, so can I ask you, like, usually we'll go into history and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but you were talking about this. Is there ever a time that you find that there's very little literature? I know you had experience in pharma, which tends, in my experience, to have more literature than
Yes.
med device. Am I right in that? Is that your experience, or am I
Completely.
wrong?
Yeah. And,
Really?
and generally higher quality studies too. So, when you're the reviewer, you're the person pulling together literature. You always love when there are a bunch of really well designed RCTs you can pull from. And in device, you obviously just have fewer studies overall, but also often you have single arm studies that are harder to compare. But yeah, you also asked about gaps. I actually like to think about and what we call our practice here is systematic review, right? So if you're going to the literature and you're trying to pull evidence from a bunch of different studies, we call that a systematic review. When doing one, if you don't find a lot, we turn around and we call it a gap analysis. So either you're doing a systematic review, what's there, or you're finding what gaps you need to fill with further study.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that because you're gonna find one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a win lose. You can always set yourself up and say, well, I guess what we need to do is design that RCT that we need.
Yeah, it's when I was I was trained at Pfizer early, young 20, gosh almighty, 28 years ago, 29 years ago, whatever. And I remember them teaching this, and I think I might be able to still rattle it off. It was like we would be presenting a study to a doctor saying, listen, this is a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized, multi-center study that appeared in a peer review or was published in a peer-reviewed journal, and you had to name the journal and the date, right? And you could tell, like, they jammed it into your head because I just remembered that right off. I didn't practice. And then I got into med device, and I was like, people are like, oh, yeah, there's this great paper on spondylolisthesis. And I look at it like, unblinded, 82 patients. And you're like, yeah, it is hard. It would be hard to do the same thing in surgery or med device. But it was stark for me. Is part of that because of the nature of med device being different than pharma? I mean, is that a part of it?
I think it's actually multiple things. So the one that everyone always says, like when we talk about evidence, it's people always talk about budget. They're like, well, the pharma companies can afford to do that. But I think that sort of is after the fact. That's like recognizing that every pharmaceutical is expected to either gain billions of dollars or cost billions of dollars or both. I think that's the sort of low hanging fruit answer. I actually think there's more to it. Devices can be changed so much more. So like even when you're doing a device review, you have to do a lot more like, okay, it's this version of, and so devices are a very fast moving landscape. They're like 6,000 510Ks approved every year, something like that. They're like 50 new drugs. So the pharmaceuticals, I think that they're more like you will have one drug on the market and then it'll be out there for a long time. Whereas devices, there is that sort of constant improvement cycle where you're going to have V1, V2, V3, and then also like there are many differences in procedures too. So like the drugs, often it's like here's the indication, here's the drug. Devices, you might use the same device for a bunch of different types of procedures, and then you probably need to subdivide all those, and you're not going to do an RCT on 19 different types of procedures done with a single device. So I think there are some traits of devices and drugs that make drugs much easier to say, hey, here's a patient profile, here's a treatment, and then here's a set of outcomes.
Right. And then it makes it easier, I would assume, to compare this research to an extent, even though it's still extremely difficult. When I got out of pharma and biotech, which I was in for 9 years, and then went to med device, I remember part of the appeal to med device, I didn't think about it as deeply as you just described, was that we couldn't, like when I would get the same feedback at multiple doctors about the drug I was selling. And you had to manage expectations more because you couldn't manipulate the molecule.
Yeah,
and then in med device, you're like,
plug and
well,
play, yeah.
you kind of can. I have not thought about that in quite some time. I knew this conversation would spark all sorts of weird memories from me, and you did it.
There's even a bunch of types of studies, actually. Not to, sorry to interrupt there, but you can do like studies of like, hey, for this procedure type, do low volume centers do worse than high volume centers? Is a common review type I've done to try to assess, because devices, there's so much more that a surgeon or an interventionalist will do that could affect the patient. So that means that multi-center becomes all the more important. That means all these background factors, they're actually, you can induce bias. There's also benefit in that, yeah, you can use the device better or differently. It's harder to use a drug better or differently other than dose changes.
Right, yeah. I don't think that was a tangent, although I sort of felt like it might be. But it's fascinating. I don't know that everybody in med device or pharma thinks this way when you're on the sales side, which is the way I've always been. And then people say this, I'm like, well, of course that makes sense. And frankly, the threshold, the FDA approval is completely different than FDA clearance. And I did not have an appreciation for the difference in terminology. I probably used them the same way
Yeah.
10 or 12, 13 years ago. And then I got corrected by somebody and I never forgot it, right?
By the legal department that gave you a training, right?
So someone like that. I'll just leave it at that. And it wasn't very polite. So let's go back to you guys in Nested Knowledge. So you have experience trying to wade through this and you recognize the problem. But I know some of it was on the pharma side, right? But was much of it on the med device side?
At the beginning, actually, all of it. If I jump back to the very beginning,
let's start.
Yeah. So I came out. I was actually in a master's program, and my brother Keith contacted me, and he said, "Hey, Kevin, I hope you're enjoying school. Anyway, I'm starting a company, and I hope you will join me." And his original idea was actually, let's help doctors write papers. So we did start, like, our first toe into entrepreneurship was effectively medical writing. We found out very quickly that actually we needed to do a lot more than help doctors write papers. We needed to help companies write clinical protocols, write trial reports, and write regulatory documents, and even write medical grants. So over 5 years, we expanded all of those services and basically had our own miniature consultancy supporting pretty much entirely device companies in those roles. Along the way, I wrote a grant for a Mayo Clinic spin-out that was creating a balloon guide catheter for stroke and other neurovascular treatment. And I wrote their grant. They asked me to join the team when the grant got funded, and I actually ended up as CEO of that company after a couple of years. So I sort of moved sideways into device leadership from support, right? Being a researcher, being a grant writer for teams that were doing this. So I met like 100 medical device entrepreneurs and then became one myself.
Some phone call from your brother, huh?
Yeah.
Right, like it's kind of like you started and that's where you ended up. So, which is a very unique historical background, the way you guys got here, right?
Yeah.
And you showed up on my radar through a mutual friend, I think Anatoly Gaveman. But I remember looking at your product, and which we'll get into in a second.
Yeah.
Looking at it going, hey, wait a minute. I think there might be an application for the companies that I work with. And this is not an ad for me or you guys, right? Like I'm fascinated by small med device companies, but I see potentially a way to use yours for value analysis frankly, on both sides of the table. So let's talk about, you are running this and you start to talk to med device. What were you running into with med device, with regards to research studies and trying to synthesize all this?
Yeah, so I like that you called this out. I think entrepreneurs should always be obsessed with problems. Like I must solve this for the world. And so for us, that was actually first for ourselves, both as researchers and then in the device company. We wanted to use the literature. In our case, it was actually originally, this was before we even built the device. We wanted to use literature to determine unmet needs, like clinical unmet needs that we could address with device innovations. So it really does start from like R&D is the earliest time I think you should look into the literature. But throughout the whole life cycle, like I learned the device life cycle, and it's like, oh, when I'm going into regulatory, I need to use the literature for tons of this submission, like everything from like what is the anatomy I'm accessing to like what are other therapies performance. When I'm going to market, I obviously like the best. You said it earlier, the best marketing in pharma and device is science, right? It's using the literature to say, hey, A is better than B because of C, and no physician is going to trust something anything less than like published science. And so basically all of that, I was like, okay, so then what's the tool out there to just pull all that literature together so I can have that in one place and use it? And I didn't find anything. We were using quite literally Google Sheets to like manage thousands of studies on topics of interest for us and for our potential customers. And so I actually just started to build with an intern to start, and then later with my Nested Knowledge co-founders. I started to build basically a database that would be ask the question once, and then it is a living question that you can update as much as you want in the future. So the original idea was just, I have an important question. I want to answer it really well, and then I want to keep that alive going forward. So
So
very small
when
beginnings.
was yeah. When was this though? You were coming up with that single small question because it automatically sounds like something I know we'll get into. But when is this? Is this 2020?
This is actually
2000
2018. I was still the
okay.
CEO of the device company. I sold my device company in 2021, but I was actually already thinking about this in the early days. We actually founded the company of Nested Knowledge in September of 2018. That's how young and fresh-eyed we were. We were like, "Hey, this is an idea. It's got legs. We're going to sell the device company, but then we're really going to invest in technology."
So let's go back to 2017. Let's
Yeah,
go back before you go. We got to figure
yeah,
this out. We're gonna because we're doing this on Google Sheets, right?
yeah.
Like think about that. So what was that like? So you said you have a question. You would sort of stack stuff in Google Sheets, and then how would you use it to solve a question? And then we will show an example of how
Yeah.
you solve a question that I either posed to you or you posed to me and said, "Yeah, let's use that as an example."
No, no,
But
it
tell me
was you
what kind of
posed to me.
question
I
it was.
promise. I did a question that I had less experience on, which that's what I do now. Like my job these days is to take on research questions in medical areas that I have to learn about quickly. So it really helps having a literature tool. But yeah, 2018 or even 2017 when we were struggling with this, I remember very clearly the first literature review questions that I was focused on were all in stroke, right? The device that we developed was a balloon guide catheter for guiding to and then occluding flow before you're taking out a clot. And the literature on that was really difficult to work with because no one had done an RCT on balloon guide catheters. All of the data came from secondary analyses or like single center retrospective studies. So we were pulling together basically a systematic review to try to see whether balloon guide catheters actually outperformed conventional catheters. So the very first review we did was to basically say, do we have a value proposition for the device that we're designing? And I literally still have that. We published it actually after we used it ourselves. We said, "Hey, let's make this available to the world." But I remembered how difficult that was, and so the next companies that came to me and wanted literature support, it was actually for a bunch of different purposes, from regulatory to communication with physicians. I was like, "Oh, do you want a literature review on this? Okay, if so, I have this experimental tool. Would you like to have us try it out for you?" At the beginning, we really wanted to be good listeners. We're big. Keith and I are big on the philosophy of customer discovery, which is sort of it's basically good listening. It's empathy. As an entrepreneur, you should start by making sure that the problem you're solving is an important and painful and like a problem worth solving with money to customers. And so
Yeah.
we mostly just listened to customers and said, "Hey, oh, you have a literature need? Okay, how would you like that addressed?" And then we would build out features that addressed it based on that input.
Well,
So there's,
well
yeah,
said. Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, like you know what I've noticed with a lot of founders, which I'm not sensing from you, is founders tend to think they have it figured out, and then go do customer discovery, and then they
as like
jam
a
up customer
checkbox.
discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they start jamming up customer discovery because they'll say, "Okay, so like, how would you like it?" And you're like, "Well, I'd really like it." And they're like, "Don't you think you want it this way?" And they're
Yeah.
like,
Thumb on the
I
scale.
feel like
Yeah.
you're trying to persuade as opposed to listen, you know? So that's it. I really like how you framed that. So you worked off of the customer discovery and then started to build based on that in addition to your
Yes.
experience?
Yeah, I'd say the other thing that we based it on was the literature. So there's actually a lot of scientific literature on systematic reviews, believe it or not. There's even when we started Nested Knowledge, there were already guides out there on like which features were necessary in order to, or like which steps need to be done in a systematic review. So we could use those guides as basically our playbook on, okay, they say we need to do a search across multiple databases. How can we make it so you can search multiple databases from Nested Knowledge and pull those records in? Oh, and then if there's multiple databases, we need to deduplicate those records. Okay, we need to have a process to deduplicate between the two databases. So you can follow the best scientific practices, and a lot of those were our users, right? Our users were PhD scientists who really understood systematic review deeply. So it wasn't just like casual request. It was more like, oh, but this is a scientific process that I need to do exactly this way. And so the listening there could be a lot more structured to an existing scientific practice. I would say that we fall into the bucket of a company that is trying to automate or assist with an existing practice. We're not trying to invent an entire new discipline. We're trying to say, hey, the most important way that you'd use the literature is to combine it and analyze it. That is currently being done in a very manual, very intensive way, and we need a better way to take on this important question that is already practiced all the time.
Yeah, it makes me think of I've been at so many journal clubs over the years, and I'm sitting here going this is the fourth or fifth year resident teaching the first and second years the how to assess just a study. Although yours is way deeper. Yours is now compare them, right, and put them together. And are there things we should be learning from them? And but I'm sitting there going man, this would be a journal club.
This would be a journal club on steroids.
Right?
Yeah. This would be a journal club's one study usually. This would be oh, hey, we have a topic, a new study came out, new RCT in this area. Let's compare it against all the evidence that's ever come out in this area before. You could do that with a nested knowledge journal club.
I love it. So let's look at, so you sort of banged around with a couple different ideas, but you started listening and you're listening and you're listening and you're creating this. And I do want you to show me an example in a second, but I'm trying to think how to ask this question. You have sort of followed multiple paths with this, and how did you know what to follow and what not to? Or are you even sure right now?
Never be sure. If you're an entrepreneur, you got to think entrepreneurs are sort of like adventurers or like free solo climbers. It's you should never feel safe. Just never. You should always be on your watch for things going wrong and never think you're too good. But we mostly, really good mentorship, I think, helped a lot. We talked about how I came from device. Now much of the use of nested knowledge is on the pharma side too. That was not me or Keith making that decision. That was that we got some good advisors who said, hey, you guys, you're working on literature reviews. Those are used in device companies in these ways, but, on the pharma side, these are extremely important for a lot of functions. And one of the functions we plugged into, just as an example, we started to work with the health economics teams that had to submit dossiers for reimbursement. So basically, the most important question that a pharma company can answer is, can I get reimbursement? That ends up being built on top of a systematic literature review. And so we started to work with the researchers doing that in pharma just because of good intros from experienced advisors. And we sort of naturally found our way into those pain points by finding researchers who, they were already struggling with their systematic review. And they're like, oh my God, thank God, there's a better way to do what I'm already doing. I'm really interested in now.
They've been doing it on pen and paper, and you walked in with a high functioning calculator, or I don't take that in the spirit in which it's intended. Yeah. It's a compliment, right? Yeah.
No. Yeah, we are the calculator compared to the. It's more like we are. If I'm literal, we are the AI web-based application instead of the Excel sheet. But I think that is sort of the similar transition in terms of difficulty.
But from stone tablet to iPad tablet.
Exactly. Yeah,
I'm working
tablet to tablet, huh?
I'm working on the joke. Bear with me.
No, I'm waiting on it. But the other thing I'm really excited about now, though, because there's so many places where I know systematic review is used, for reimbursement. But where I think that literature is used, but people aren't systematic, is actually where I'm looking at now. And I think that actually value analysis is often like that on the device side, where you're going to use the literature, but it's going to be very spotty, right? You're going to pull studies based on what you've heard or based on what your colleagues recommend. And there's not a systematic approach to source answers on your question. And so in those areas, often it's a little bit harder to, open the door because there's not someone who's saying, oh my God, thank God, I already do these really intensive reviews. Instead, it's someone who has a really unofficial practice that could be made more comprehensive. And in those cases, I feel like we can say, hey, this is better and faster and will get you everything that you'd like, plus a lot more than you're finding right now by doing hand searching. But if there's not someone who's a systematic reviewer on the team, then I still have to go in and say, hey, you should upgrade how you even approach the literature.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense because I was sitting here thinking, I think when we first talked, I was thinking value analysis would really like this because frankly, on the med device side, if I'm submitting something, I might cherry pick some data if you're following me, right? Let's be realistic.
Yes.
I'm not if
You're
I'm in
not.
sales and marketing, I'm not necessarily objective. I'm selling something.
Yes.
So I was thinking value analysis could use this as a like a
Both sides.
legitimized
Yeah.
filter to do it because that's not something they need to do, but they don't have somebody dedicated to it full time. I don't think. And then I was thinking, oh, well, there's a lot of these companies that I talk to who are very legitimate, but can't expect a value analysis committee to read all the literature. Wouldn't it be nice to come in and say, no, we are very legitimate, and here I've third party this to do this. So there's so many uses for this. That's why
No, no, I'm
I
completely
have to
with you.
limit
Yeah.
my imagination.
I think
So
that's a
let
great use case. And if I just jump off of what you're saying, I actually think that trust is becoming like the most important thing. And this is not just in our industry, right? Like people are like, I don't trust deepfakes, and so we need like something that can make video more trustworthy. I work with a lot of device and pharma companies, and I generally find they want to be scientific. They are not scared of not of their device underperforming nearly as much as they are scared of being called out as biased in what they submit. Like I work with
right.
tons and tons of scientists, and they tend to want to show that the evidence they're submitting is trustworthy. Like that is their main goal.
Yeah.
And if you
Well,
aren't systematic, you will always seem to cherry pick. So
yeah,
I think that this is a way
that's
where you can
credibility,
bring
right?
trust. Yeah.
It's exactly right. It's trust. It's credibility, right?
Let's take a break for a minute and talk to our sponsor, me. This podcast is brought to you by me, Mark Copeland, the Value Analysis Whisperer. Have you ever tried to get a new product, your new innovative medical device, approved in an ambulatory surgery center or hospital and failed? Have you ever thought about the amount of patients who can't get access to your innovative medical device because you can't get it approved? Have you ever thought about the clinician champions of yours who are frustrated because you and your company can't get your new product approved where they work? Of course you have. We all have had that happen. Here's the difference. Are you ready to make a change and do something about it? If so, go to my website, valueanalysisexpert.com, and click on some time with me, Mark Copeland, the Value Analysis Whisperer. You can do this. I will help. Now, back to our podcast.
So, okay, I posed a question to you,
Yeah.
I believe, that was about a topic that, look, I love the ortho bros, and I don't mean the surgeons. I love the companies and reps. They're wonderful people. Some of them even hire me sometimes to help them with value analysis. But, like, the conversations about does robotic total knee arthroplasty help, or is it a waste of time, or is it a marketing? And I honestly have no idea. I don't know. And I care less and less every day, right? But I asked you, like, could we
Yeah.
run something that's objective that shows the literature? And for the listeners or viewers out there, it's hard to describe like Kevin's got a really cool, I'm not going to say device, tool, but you can't really hear about it. You sort of have to see it. And I asked him to do something I don't typically do, which is show this to me, right? So he's going to share a screen. So if you're listening, sorry, we'll do our best. If you're watching,
I'll speak over
I
what
think
I'm
you'll be able to
showing.
see this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's. You want to share and
Yeah.
show me the sort of how the objective literature search would look at total knee arthroplasty,
Yes.
everything that's been published. So show
Let
me
me
this.
start
We're
by
looking at the screen.
just giving a brief overview of how
Yeah.
this knowledge works. I think it's hard to look at the outputs without saying how do we get there. So we do take. I said we've listened very carefully to the best scientists out there on what does a systematic review require. Effectively, it requires searching the literature, bringing back records. So think of that as like an abstract that needs to be screened for relevance. So you put in a question like, is robot total knee arthroplasty more efficacious or safe than manual? And then you run a search. You bring back all potentially relevant records, but anyone who's done a systematic review knows you actually end up kicking out like 90% of what comes back from the search. So at both of those stages, we have an AI that helps you first draft your search. You type in a question, it builds a query for you. You have an AI screen based on your criteria. And then we also extract the data. So you can think of it as a step-by-step from I have a research question to I have a set of records is the search step. I have a set of records. I want to get down to only the relevant ones. That's screening. Tagging is our solution for extracting, which would be I want to go into those underlying records and find, okay, what is the safety? What is the efficacy? What is anything comparative directly between manual and and robotic, or even like what are the specific devices used for robotic TKA. So all of that is the sort of background on how these are built. And then everything that you build in nested knowledge, we do create a living review. So I said at the beginning, like our value proposition was we should ask the question only once and we should get a really good answer. And then we should be able to use that going forward. Since then, we have followed the AI revolution very carefully. And we've actually narrowed in on specific steps in the systematic review process that we think we can do fully traceable, trustworthy AI steps that will get you through that search and screening and extraction a lot faster and get you to what we call our synthesis pages, which are our outputs. Yeah. And so that's where I'm going to start in here. Any questions on the process from a neutral observer's perspective? Yeah.
No, that was great. It speaks to the credibility. You were talking about the general AI question about like people are like, whoa, this is crazy good. And then they're like, how do I know? Where are you pulling this from? How do I know it's like the source is any good? And that's what frankly, everybody is trying to wrap their arms around. And that's a credibility question that someone like you has to be able to understand and explain and keep up to date. And so if people are watching or listening, the way I think about this is today I'm trying to prove that my robot helps so that this health system will say, we know it's trustworthy, we know it's credible, and we know it's good for patients. But data comes out from today. In 6 months, there may be more published data. And you're saying this would then, you could run it again so that if a different health system's looking at it, it's got an updated version.
That's exactly correct.
So that you're not dated. Yeah, interesting.
We call it living review. We did not invent the term, but I think we are the first system that really made it so you could do large scale, like keep dozens of reviews active. I think before us, it would have simply been too much labor. So jumping straight into the actual findings here, I did not describe one of our AIs, and you're right. We have to be so careful. Every one of these AIs has to be validated for the exact step that it takes in the research process. If I wanted to give you just like sort of a generic AI approach, it would be like close your eyes, type this into Claude, and then get an answer. That does not fly in systematic review. You need to be systematic, right? You need to follow each of those stages. And so each of our AI tools is really narrowed on each of those steps. So it only drafts a search strategy. It only and traceably screens studies and so on. So this last AI actually takes your extracted data and it summarizes it. And so I actually have this right here. For instance, I have a summary of robotic versus manual performance in TKA systems that was written by the AI on top of the underlying studies. So all the studies that were screened and considered to be relevant were included. And then if we click in here, we can actually see that each one of these studies has tags that were pulled out from the abstract or the full text that helps you drill down on the answers to these questions. So fully traceable answers on, what was the efficacy of robot-assisted TKA or manual in every single study. So if you want to trace back and see where the AI found the answers here, it is fully traceable. We keep a full history of where we found the study, the data that came out of it. And then at the highest level, right? Like, what do you really want to know? Is robotic better than manual for a certain question? And so here the AI wrote, based on my question of effectively summarize robotic versus manual performance in TKA. And you can, of course, read this yourself, but for those who are just listening, effectively, there were a lot of short-term benefits in terms of implant positioning, limb alignment, even reduced radiographic outlier rates, shorter hospital stays, higher rate of discharge. But in terms of long-term patient-reported outcomes, it was relatively consistent between studies. So a lot of short-term early evidence of, again, better alignment, better radiographic outcomes. But if you go to the PROs, the patient-reported outcomes, they were basically long-term, pretty much equivalent with the manual. So hopefully that is the sort of answer you'd look for, right? Like at the highest level, hey, Kevin, I don't know a great deal about robotic versus manual TKA, but that's what we really try to deliver as the final output from a review.
You're gonna laugh. I think you should almost turn that into a buyable PDF and just sell it to everybody that wants it. Because and it's funny. This is the funny way people will read it. Those who don't believe in it will say, "See, it's no better at 2 years."
Yeah,
and
the ones who like
it. The people that do believe in it will say, "Oh, but it gets you there faster." And I would say, at the end of the day, if I'm a patient, I kind of sit there and go, I would like to feel better sooner, even if in 2 years everybody's the same. I just got 2 months sooner recovery. Who knows, right? Like, I don't know who's right or who's wrong. That's why we leave it up to the surgeons. But it's, who I didn't hear this from? Stryker, Zimmer
Yeah.
Biomet. I heard it from published journal that's peer reviewed, run through a very strict filter. Frankly,
Exactly.
that's how I
A filter
simplistically.
down to the evidence that's actually on point. And and honestly, our obsession is with that traceability to show, right, like trust. You want to be able to trust the evidence that comes out of this. Even if you're having AI assist you, you want to be able to say, okay, so Kevin, you gave me that high level conclusion. Reduces hospital stay. Okay, by how much? You can always click back on the underlying studies to find those exact
Yeah.
answers and make sure that we've performed the review right. So if you're receiving this, right, if you are on the flip side, you're not Stryker, but you're being shown evidence by Stryker that shows that the Mako device does reduce hospitalizations. This is fully traceable to where that data comes from. So that's I think a huge part of, especially an AI assisted review. If we're going to have trust, it always has to be based on being able to show your work all the way back. All the way to, I actually did include a table, every single study's TKA efficacy, TKA safety, and the summary of comparison. If you wanted to share this and drill down, you could give someone the high level, right? They get one sentence or 5 sentences that give them a textual interpretation, but they could also drill down on the underlying data. They could drill down on the study methods. We even include visuals that allow you to trace how many studies were included, how many studies were excluded, where the studies came from, the study types that were included. So if you wanted to see like how many of these were actually randomized trials or how much of this is just retrospective data, all of that's built in so that you can have that traceability and that trust in the methods that get you the answer.
Yeah. So I hope if people are listening to this, I hope they're actually listening while watching. Yeah. So okay, we can take that. We can take your screen down, but now I want to talk about a couple of ways I think about this. Right. So you said something earlier, and I'm going to ask because sometimes when I feel like I talk to smart people like you're running at 1080, and I'm like at 720. So I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about, you said something, 90% of the studies are sort of, I'll use it, filtered
are
out.
excluded. Yeah, are kicked
Right.
out.
And that's just because of the lack of, like it's not a big enough N, it's not credible enough. How would you describe that?
All sorts of reasons. So when you structure a systematic review, one of the things you do is you define your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So why would something come in? In this review, I basically defined had to report robotic either as single arm or with comparison against manual for total knee arthroplasty. So we'd have a reason of does not report total knee arthroplasty. And then every time we find a study that reports, total hip arthroplasty instead, we'd kick it out for that reason. The difficulty is that when journals publish or when authors publish, they don't give enough structured information that would make it so we could just search it in a database with total high fidelity. We have to go out into about 40 million publications and try to find the ones that might be on point, and that's what comes back from your search. And that's usually like you search for reports TKA and reports robot and reports arthroplasty, and then you run the search. That's going to bring back editorials, guidelines, so study types have to be assessed. That's going to bring back studies that mix the types of arthroplasty, and you want to get down to just TKA. It's going to report studies that maybe say robot, but it isn't related to the TKA procedure. You're going to have to kick those out. So the reasons you could kick something out are actually pretty much infinite, which is why you have to have a structured process to get there. And the reason that there's so many that come back that are irrelevant is that, you usually want to get down to just the high quality studies that report intervention 1 and intervention 2 for outcome C or whatever. Often the studies that come back from a search that has those terms will not have that information. So in a typical systematic review, you're going to have a 95% loss rate in order to make sure you're comprehensive, because you could have it could be more balanced, right? You could say, hey, let's do a super narrow search. Why don't we just search more so that we only get a couple hundred results? But then you're almost certainly going to miss some relevant evidence. So any systematic reviewer knows you have to sort of search broadly and then screen down from there, or you miss out on comprehensiveness.
Right. It means like sort of throw a wide net and then start to tighten it up, or however you would describe it. Okay. Wow.
Actually, fishing analogies are quite common in systematic review.
Makes sense.
Like there's this pool of studies that we're trying to find, this type of fish. We need to throw these ones back out of the net. A lot of that in systematic review.
I was hoping I came up with a whole new analogy, and sure enough, I'm way behind the really smart people. Okay, so how do people look at this when you talk to companies? Or who in the company does it make sense, and who do you need to sit in front of? Because I don't know that this automatically makes sense. And you've factored a whole new technology that we're still trying to figure out, which is AI, right? Like,
Yes.
who listens to this?
Yeah, you're right. There's not just the problem point of explaining a complex process. It's like, oh, here's how you do a systematic review. It's a multi-step process, and then we've tried to automate these ones. I never want to start that way. I always, even now in sales, much like customer discovery, I start with the pain point. I say, how do you access the literature? And if they say, well, I search on PubMed and Embase and I pull them into a spreadsheet and then I screen them with a colleague. I'm like, okay, amazing. You're going to adopt nested knowledge after this call, and I'll demo it to them. If they say, oh, my team uses literature as part of, their MSL package or something like that, then I know they're probably more of a decision maker, but they're not going to be, not everyone is, getting their hands dirty in the literature every day. Usually there's going to be, in almost every company, there's going to be a team that is tasked with being the literature sourcers. And that can be on library side, it can be in med affairs. It's often in the pharma side, it's often actually in the health economics and outcomes research. So the people who I know are going to be users, when I ask the question, like, how do you interact with the medical literature right now? They have an immediate answer, and that answer involves a ton of pain. So those are the conversations that I love. I'll be frank about where we run into, like, we certainly have pain points in our own process still, which is at the levels where you're not accessing literature every day, we still have to get across like this complex process that solves a complex pain point. And of course, if you're not getting your hands dirty with this every day, it might not seem like, you need a fancy AI solution just to look at papers. So convincing someone who's more at the decision maker level, or who, again, uses literature a little bit, right? They sometimes go to PubMed and they sometimes read through the literature and hand search, but they don't do a lot of systematic searching. Having them step up their level of scientific rigor in literature, that's like a bigger sell than, hey, replace your work intensive process with my automated process.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're currently rigorous. That's a much easier theoretical conversation than it is to say, hey, you should be rigorous, and you have to convince them to be rigorous, and then to use you to be rigorous, right? Like,
if I can give a hot take, there's an audience that I've actually, from the beginning, we were like, who should really do this more? Biomedical investors. Like, biomedical investors should be obsessed with the scientific literature, because that's really how you can tell, not just, what therapies work right now. Maybe you're investing in something that's so early it's preclinical, but what about unmet need, right? Like, even to understand the area that you're looking in, wouldn't you want to look to this? And so we've done a lot of interviews and customer discovery there, and it tends to be that investors would usually rather just trust a subject matter expert. Like, they don't want to do a rigorous review. They are already doing a rigorous due diligence on the company, and their entire efforts are dedicated to that. I'm not going to take time to get a scientist to learn Kevin's tool to do the research on this just to make sure that there's an unmet need in this area. But if my money were on the line and I were investing in a device company or a pharma company, I know that I would be obsessed with finding all of the information I could out there on the potential competitors, on the unmet need, everything.
Right. Well, you've had a company you've sold. You've been through rigorous due diligence. Why not be a little more rigorous already? Like, they're already rigorous. They just may not be on the literature. It's fascinating.
Exactly.
All right. But you're finding that they don't necessarily automatically get this.
I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. There's some investors that, like, some investors come from pharma and they've done this before, and so and we actually, we work with several angel groups that are like subject matter experts. They know what they're doing on that front. But yeah, I'd say that in the general, like in the VC world where it's much broader and they're looking across a bunch of disciplines, very rarely, that's often an inch deep and a mile wide, whereas a literature review is sort of by its nature a mile deep and an inch wide because it's on a specific topic and it gets everything. So I work really well with the people who are trying to get all the answers on a really important question. That's where nested knowledge really thrives.
So you started this as in 2018, but you still hadn't sold your other company, right?
Correct.
So you were doing this. I don't want to belittle it by calling it a side hustle, because it's not.
It was a passion.
Were doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
so it's a passion project in your spare time. Whatever spare time you had.
Yeah, pretty non-existent at that point, but yes.
Yeah. So this was pre-large learning, like
the large language model. Yeah.
Yeah, this was before all of that became common or aware of the general public. Were you was this already known? Like, did you know this was coming?
Uh,
The future's
I'm
all
not
the
a yeah, I'm
futures.
not a sage or a prophet. I'm more of a research nerd. We actually were building a lot of our own machine learning tools, like so basically using NLP and machine learning, which were around, right? Those were widely used. There
Right.
were tools out there that already had been tested on the literature. In fact, I
Yep.
think you could put nested knowledge's screening process in a textbook on machine learning, the one that we built before GPT came out. It is very much like machine learning. Usually, you want to feed it a training set, right? And it's like identify includable records and bucket the ones that should be in and out. And so we'd already trained an AI for years to recognize studies that should be in or out of a reviewer's specific review, trained on that reviewer's decisions before GPT hit. So we were really trying to innovate in AI at the time. The moment large language models hit, we had these NLPs for like understanding like biomedical, interventions and disease states and outcomes, and we had this machine learning algorithm that we'd built that I think is just a really typical, really straightforward, down the middle use case. And then we were like, oh my goodness, we need to change our value proposition. We're not just going to be, living reviews that are maintained on an important question. We're going to be rapid living reviews on a certain topic. And so,
Right.
for instance, the review that I just showed you, I can do that type of review often on my sales calls. I will do a review during the call. So we've taken a process that before nested knowledge was like 12 to 18 months. And if you want the AI answer to something, I can give it to you in effectively under an hour.
Right. Yeah. It's and what it's in a couple of months, it's going to be 30 minutes, right? Like or
Uh,
faster.
Man, I'm allergic to overpromising. I'm going to say that we have already gotten a ton of the gains in terms of time, and we're going to be working really hard to get from 1 hour down to 5 minutes for the next like couple of years at least.
Right.
Because being perfect on literature reviews is impossible, but an asymptote of perfection is worth seeking. So absolutely, we will be
Yeah.
pushing that.
Well said. So okay. So a little background on you and your brother and your dad. Could you
Yeah.
tell people about like your name was known to me and I couldn't figure out why till you
I
guys told
I
me.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So talk about that.
So I guess I could have given this in the history, but I actually grew up surrounded by medical research. My father, Dave Kallmes, is he leads Mayo Clinic's neurovascular research lab. So he actually helped invent one of the aneurysm models in rabbits. He has been testing devices since the 90s for device companies. He has helped develop devices. He has been an interventionalist for 40 some years. And he is the author on some 950 papers that are published in the literature. So, and he is the deputy editor or the outgoing deputy editor of the Radiology Journal. So he has a lot of experience in the literature, a lot of experience in research, and we grew up surrounded by things like, double-blind, multi-center,
Placebo
yeah,
controlled. Yeah, all that.
all the
Yeah.
things that you were pitching
I
in,
was
in
trained
the
on.
90s in pharma. I was at dinner with my family and hearing from my dad. He was actually the PI, and this is maybe how he became famous in the ortho area. He was the PI on a trial that was published in the New England Journal in I think 2009 on vertebroplasty, and it was a sham trial of vertebroplasty. And so I learned about sham controlled trials when I was in high school, and it was negative. And so since then, vertebroplasty volume has dropped by about half, and kyphoplasty has become more common. But obviously, there are a lot of spine surgeons with really strong opinions and patients who have benefited who are like, that RCT was unfair to vertebroplasty. And then there are others that are like, I'm so glad that study proved that my kyphoplasty is better than yeah. So there's a lot of strong opinions on his research.
Yeah.
Uh,
Which goes to the way human beings actually sometimes use that tremendously objective, the best data we've ever created, and say, yeah, that validates what I already thought, or
yeah.
they must have screwed something up because that's not what I think. Right?
I think the psychological research is clear. Our brains work more like lawyers or salesmen than scientists. We really wish we were scientists, but I think that that's where rigor and good methods come in because you really want an answer to be something and you can't help but bias things. And so that's why scientists have worked so hard to put, like, why do you need double
Yeah.
blinding? It doesn't make any sense unless people have incentives and previous views. So I think you have to take those sorts of things into account in all aspects of science. And I learned that, again, very, very early.
Yeah. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard because that's the whole concept behind it. It's just not the way we're made. It's not the way we're designed. We have to fight that, and it's not easy. And that comes back to the way you and I were talking about this, in that from my perspective of clients using it to prove that they're credible and help the end decision makers have what they need that's credible to make an educated decision, or the actual, on the other side of the table, having something that says, how credible is this? I can go to something that is credible, or as credible as we have been able to create based on all the data that's in it. So I actually like it, and I actually think it's something that people should be thinking about and looking at because of what you just were talking about. It's a constant search for credibility. And,
Exactly.
you can be the most honest person in the world, but if they don't believe you, you still have to keep proving that you're credible. And it's great. I really think, like, I hope people that listen to this start bothering you to get that search that you did on the robotic TKA. Shoot,
I'm happy to make that one public. I will warn, I did it in, it's an AI rapid review, and we do offer those both. Like when people are learning nested knowledge, we're like, hey, there's the AI approach, and then there's the AI assisted, what we call a human in the loop approach, if you want to make sure that everything is ready for the VAC, right? That's where we would recommend get a researcher who can help make sure that this is perfect. But I'm happy to share the AI outputs of that, or if people have questions. I think entrepreneurs should never complain about being busy. So if you want to make me busy helping you with research on a key question in the literature, we'll just be excited to jump in on it.
The way I use this podcast oftentimes is when I talk to people like you who have something that I think might help, or like what you've gone through is your struggle, or the things that, then I can turn around and send it to people saying, hey, you're not the only one that struggles with this. See, this is the nature of the beast, because sometimes, especially first time entrepreneurs, are like, I can't believe this. I'm like, hey man, as I've openly stated, I'm ripping off Guy Raz until he sends me a cease and desist letter, and then I'll consider ceasing. How I built this, I'm talking to people about how they're building it. But when you listen to that, when you listen to his show, one of the reasons it's so great is you sit there and go, oh my gosh, the Zappos guys went through the same thing, right? Or the Spanx woman dealt with the same things. So there's credibility there. And I like to use this podcast to send to people and say, hey, these guys might actually be able to help you, or you might be able to help, they might be able to help you, right? And it's a great way to... the small med device companies. I mean, you should try to take as much money as you can from Stryker. I totally, fully endorse you doing that, Kevin. But there's a lot of small companies that I think might get some use from the credibility factor. And I think there's value there,
It's really hard for me to do anything but think that entrepreneurs are the best people for this tool because, again, I originally built it for a small device company that didn't have the people. If you're a small device company and you're trying to either understand the treatment landscape of an area you're innovating in, or if you already have a device on the market and you want to prove its efficacy, literature review is going to be the best way. And I think you're actually totally right about like the learning from other founders. I've read so many founder biographies. I've listened to a lot of how I built this. And I actually went to a founders event at one of my investors where they had a lot of their earlier portfolio companies come and present. And I was like, pizza automation company. I'm not sure what I can learn from that. You watch the presentation, you're like, they have all the same problems. It's like a workflow that you have to like fully automate. This is wow, systematic reviews are just pizza. So yeah.
Now that's funny. And that's why I knew you'd be good at this when we talked. So, all right, so I'm going to jump to my final question I tend to ask people because I love it. I love asking them this question, and I never know what their answer is going to be, and there is no right answer, right? So my question usually is, Kevin, if you went to bed tonight and you lost a tooth, you put your tooth under your pillow, and tomorrow you lift your pillow up, and the tooth fairy came and rewarded you for your tooth, what would that reward? What would you love to see? What would you blow out the candle? What do you
I
want
actually, I actually immediately have. This might be too high of an aspiration, but I have an immediate answer. It's been on my mind a lot. I'd pick up my pillow, I'd turn over, and it would say, International Guideline on Acceptability of AI in Systematic Review. And it would be from, it could be from Cochrane, it could be from the Open Science Foundation, it could be from a collection of HTA bodies. I find that many people are really excited to use AI, but then they're like, am I allowed? And there's no FDA for nested knowledge. So on one hand, we don't need to go through it to get on the market. But on the other, in terms of making people feel, or like making people know that they're allowed to do something, I think there's still a lot of guidance to emerge.
Yeah, so could you briefly, because I know the name Cochrane,
Yeah.
and then you mentioned two more that I'm not familiar with. So what are those bodies or organizations?
So Cochrane, I actually know them well. They were part of my early inspiration. They were an organization founded in 1979 to review the entire literature on key questions. So they are an organization, it's a nonprofit that's dedicated to a mission, effectively, of carrying out the sorts of reviews that nested knowledge is the infrastructure for. So obviously, when it comes to trust in the scientific process, a lot of people look to Cochrane guidelines on how to do reviews. They've released like the risk of bias guidelines. So if you've ever seen like a risk of bias assessment of a review, that was possibly done with the Cochrane guidance. And they actually did come out with a position statement in partnership with a group that puts out guidelines for AI. And that is the Open Science Foundation. They do a lot, actually. I'm really impressed by them. They also have a lot of innovations in publishing. So basically pre-publishing methods. So like think of it as instead of just preprints, you actually publish your methods openly so that people can trust in the outputs. A lot of good initiatives going on at the Open Science Foundation. But one of them is guidelines on AI in evidence synthesis. And so I'd love to have really clear guidance on where AI can and should be used. The last one I said was HTA bodies. And sorry, I hate to use acronyms without defining them, but health technology assessment. So I said that our major use case in pharma is health economics to basically get reimbursement. The bodies in the international sphere that generally determine reimbursement for drugs are HTA bodies. And some of them, NICE in the UK and the Canadian Drug Authority, have both issued guidance. And it was transformative for my career because all of a sudden, people who are submitting to UK are able to say, oh my God, they say I can use systems like yours for search and for screening and for extraction. If there could be, like, that's one government, that's huge, right? That's all the UK. All of a sudden, we can use nested knowledge to submit. But you said that I could wish for anything under my pillow, and I would want an international alignment of all of these bodies. It doesn't have to be exactly what NICE said. It just has to tell people what the guidelines are because people are so much more comfortable when they know what they're allowed and not to do.
Yeah, well, I think that it's funny. It's the credibility for your credibility tool, right? Like it's interesting. Yeah. I just told you I'm going to ask this question. I gave you some time to think about it, and there is no wrong answer. That was a really interesting one, and I would not have foreseen that. I have one more question that popped up that I know.
Hit me.
So I'm just going to ask. I keep coming back to the journal clubs I sat in.
Yeah.
Like, are you readily available? Do you have packages for, those subspecialty groups? They're not enormous, but there's parts of maybe North American Spine Society or I'm trying to think of the Infectious Disease Society of America where they can license this because I would think there's value. Like you have so many end user potential.
We've actually left aside a huge part of our user base, which is academic researchers, and that includes people in societies like the American Stroke Association and such. Reviews are the basis for guidelines as well. Reviews are the basis for decision making by physicians in the end on what patients should be treated with. Yes, there is a lot of value, and we actually have very preferential pricing for academics and nonprofits because we know that that's sort of like a lot is going to drive research in that. In all of the decisions that are going to be made by a physician on the front lines, like trying to save lives, end up having these information streams that come in, and guidelines are such a big part of it, but also just hearing from your colleagues, right? Hearing from your colleagues about the emerging literature. Both use cases are very, we are very invested in both use cases. We love to help societies. We love to also just work with clinician researchers. We love to, again, anyone where you say, hey, I'm constantly trying to keep my team up to date on the literature. You can set a weekly repeat cycle and have our system just update you and say, hey, there were these new publications in this area. If you want, go in and extract their data. Click, new insight. It'll generate the new insights exactly like I showed you earlier, and you can present those to your colleagues. So we have a bunch of academic use cases. I know we focused a little bit more on the pharma and device because that's where a lot of my entrepreneurial journey has come. But yeah, since I was at the dinner table with my father, who I think he would call himself above all, he's a scientist. I think that use case is always close to our hearts, and we always want to help the societies, or even again, just someone who's trying to present to their colleagues what is the state of the art.
Yeah, tremendous. Listen, I knew this would be fascinating, and I could sit here and talk to you for another 3 hours, but I don't know if we should. Kevin, how can people get in touch with you if they do want to learn more about what you guys do at Nested Knowledge? What's the easiest way for them to follow you, get to you guys?
Yeah,
what's your website?
I'd say best way to follow me. I'm on LinkedIn, and I post about Nested Knowledge features and outdoor adventures. I am on, or I should say, our company. We have an about page I can share with you. That's the best place to learn about the tool directly. You can reach out from there if you want a pilot. We offer totally free pilots. People can jump into the tool. We offer trainings if people want to learn from them. So I'd say if you want to just jump into the tool, we have outreach directly on our website. That is nested-knowledge.com.
I love it. Thank you so much for being on this. And
100%.
I have a
Thanks
feeling I'm just going to be calling you going, these people need to use you right now. I would look forward
Please.
to it. So
I look forward to it too.
thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. So I often joke, as you may have heard at the end of the podcast, on the evolution chart, I'm second from the left and slightly upright. And I do sometimes feel like I'm in the 720 world talking to people who are going in 1080. And Kevin Kallmes might be one of those people. But I have seen what they do, and I'm convinced there's a use for it on med device that will help us have legitimacy, particularly for the startup. Startups struggle with credibility, not honesty, but credibility. Nobody knows you, nobody knows your product, nobody's ever heard of your company. And we, as on the sales and marketing side of that, especially if you're early on, we have to come with that credibility, and it takes time, and it is not easy to earn the trust and belief that we're credible because you have no name brand behind you. And I think that this objective access to systematic reviews of literature might be limited only by our imagination. And I can already think of a couple of companies I've talked to who say, hey, there's a lot of literature that says there's a problem that we solve. And some companies, they may not have literature saying their product solves the problem yet. But then there's a lot of companies that do have that. But how do you synthesize it and make it easy? And you could throw it in ChatGPT. You could throw it in Gemini. But is that objective? Right? And these guys are using a methodology that is accepted internationally for systematic review. So I'm really interested in this. I hope you found Kevin as interesting as I did. And I will be sending this podcast to some people saying, I think this guy might be able to help. As usual, when I run with the smart people, I have a hard time keeping up. But it sure is fun to try. I'm Mark Copeland. I'm the Value Analysis Whisperer. I help and teach small med device companies how to get their new products approved that may not have credibility in ambulatory surgery centers and hospitals. And I love talking to people who do this as well on my podcast here, How I'm Building This. I'll talk to you next time.